Good morning. First of all, I must thank the organizers for having called me here to talk to all of you this morning. As you must have known from my biodata that I'm certainly an odd man out here. I don't belong to the design community, but when I was discussing the purpose of this conference, I realized that a topic which is very close to my heart, which is the economic development of the world and India in particular, is very close to my heart, and that has a lot of bearing on several design aspects. And I think that's what I'll probably try to uncover as we go along. But there is a tremendous amount of connection between the way we look at economic development and we design, in terms of what we design, how we design, for whom we design, and so on and so forth. Be it electronic goods, be it roads, be it malls, be it any industrial products such as cell phones, or be it flyovers or swimming pools or whatever, or hundreds of things like automobiles and so on. I mean, whatever we design has a lot of bearing on the way we perceive the economic development of any society, of a country. And that's why I am here to give you my perspective about how the two are connected and what my views are about the current state of affairs as far as India is concerned, and maybe the whole world, in fact. There are two views of looking at the growth today. Today, as far as the economy is concerned, we are told time and again, almost ad nauseum, I must say, that India is growing at 7, 8%, 8%, 9%, and therefore India has progressed or India is shining and so on and so forth. And I think that's probably, I'll say that, it's a statistical, I won't say statistical jugglery, but that's one way of looking at it. I just want to sort of take a minute to tell you why I think this is misleading. A lot of times we hear on the TV channels or as well as newspapers that the experts make fun of the Hindu rate of growth, which was 3.5% between 1947 and 1991. 3.80 in fact. The Hindu rate of growth was 3.5%, and how low it was and why it was very bad and so on. But nobody dares to ask what it was before 1947. The rate of growth before 1947 was 0.7%. During the era of after independence, the rate of growth actually jumped to 3.5% as an average. And those were the toughest years. The country had to build roads, dams, had to generate electricity, had to build educational systems, had to have road transportation like state transport, STs and so on. And it required a huge amount of investment. The kind of investment which was not only this huge but would give returns in a far longer time duration. The gestation period was very, very high. In fact, that's exactly the reason why the private sector wasn't willing to invest in such ventures. It was precisely Tatas and Birlas who actually came together in what is now known and called as Bombay Plan, and public sector came into existence. And they, in fact, entrusted public sector with building the roads and dams and electricity and power generation and, hundreds of other things like education and so on, and defense, of course. All that was capital intensive with low yielding investment. And in fact, it's a miracle that from 0.7, we could actually reach an economic growth rate of 3.5%. So it's not something that we should make fun of. Now, what was the rate of growth in 1980s decade? The rate of growth in 1980s decade, pre-liberalization, the average was 5.6%. From 1991 to 2004, the average, when the era of liberalization started, the average rate of growth was 6.7%. So anybody who's done elementary mathematics would probably look at this extrapolation, 0.7, 3.5, 5.6 and 6.7, would probably, ask a question as to what is so big deal about the rate of growth from post-1991. The rate of growth then jumped from 2004 onwards to 8-9% and has come down to again 5%. Now, regardless of whether the rate of growth was high or low, we must ask a question as to what does this growth mean? Today, in terms of growth, if you look at growth and actually dissect and look at growth very minutely and very closely, we'll realize that the growth consists of a variety of products and services. Services, the percentage of services is increasing, as we know, as from agriculture to industry to services, as Alvin Toffler calls 3 phases of growth, human growth. The services has been growing, but in terms of a GDP, apart from government expenditure on military and so on, the kind of products that we've been building are only useful for the first 15 to 20% of our population. And we're in fact building 2 sections within the same country. One is Bharat and another is India. And you may have heard about this, but I just will give you some data and statistics. And this is for real. I mean, we have actually 2 nations, or 2 societies existing under one roof. The point is that most of the products such as cosmetics or soft drinks or automobiles or 2-wheelers or electronic goods or malls or water parks or the travels and tours here and abroad and hundreds of other things which make a substantial portion of our GDP are meant only for the first 15 to 20%. In fact, very, very rich, but then the trickle down has taken place only to the extent that the first 20% can afford this. Take the case of cities. When we talk about design, I'm sure we talk about designing cities as well, cities and roads and automobiles and so on. Take the case of cities. I have in fact a number of books in my personal library on the subject of death of distance. When information technology came of age after 1960s, mainframe, mini computers, 1980s was an era of personal computers, 90s internet and so on. The world was told that there will be death of distance. You don't need to travel to the work will travel to you. In the West, to a certain extent, this has come into existence. I think teleworking is increasing day by day. However, in India, it is precisely because of information technology that instead of work going to people started flocking into the cities, and 8 cities were completely butchered because of information technology and allied industries. Pune, Bombay, Hyderabad, Chennai, Delhi, and so on and so forth. The property prices rose 5-10 times, which were affordable only to a handful of people. We keep talking about IT revolution, but essentially only 30 lakh people, or 3 million people work in information technology and 7 million in allied industries in information technology. Allied means in support industries to IT. So less than 1 crore work out of 120 crore population work in information technology. If you take banking, insurance and some industries which have actually grown along with the IT industry and so on in services sector, the total number of people who can afford the big houses, 3 and 4 bedroom houses, swimming pools and so on, is extremely small. But because they have a buying power, they can keep buying these houses, and then speculation increased, and then builders started building those houses with new tiles and new designs, and obviously the design industry flourished, as we all know. More than design, I must say, the architects and the building industry flourished. But then, today nobody can enter a city of Bombay or Pune or worse in Bombay and think about buying one's own house. It's just impossible, which was at least possible 20 years back. No newcomer is allowed, literally allowed in these cities, unless you hold a job in one of those plush, paying companies. I think that's the kind of, and in these cities, there's a tremendous problem of pollution. There's a tremendous once upon a time, people used to go to Bangalore for, nice climate and then go spend a vacation and come back. Even Pune for that matter. Today in Lonavala you can't spend a day without an air conditioner. So I think that's the kind of situation that we are in. And one of the reasons is essentially the kind of growth pattern that we have chosen. The growth pattern that we have chosen, we are running after the GDP growth. We are telling the whole world that growth in GDP is essentially good for all the people. That when we produce larger amounts of goods, then they'll percolate. So trickle down will happen and actually they will reach the common masses. And therefore, the growth will increase and poverty will be reduced. But poverty hasn't reduced. If you look at the data, the official data tells us that 30% of our population is poor. This is official data. Unofficially, it's very high. But out of 30%, 17% are living literally animal level existence. 30% are poor. The next 30% are barely, able to meet both ends meet. But they can live, probably okay, but they don't have great savings. If there is even one serious illness, their entire lifetime savings are, get wiped out. So there is uncertainty, always hanging, and they're not sure as to what will happen in case there is any serious illness. And I think that's what is really bothering most of the people. The next 20% of the middle class people who have maybe 1 room to 2 room kitchen flats and they have some PF savings and so on, and they can, educate their sons and daughters and so on. And the remaining 20% of the people are people like most of us, I guess, and who have, traveled overseas and have cars and can live, etc. I think the whole economy is around what we buy and we produce. Because GDP growth is based on the demand of these 20%, because we want big houses, we want big cars, and we want cosmetics, and we want soft drinks, and we want junk food, and we want malls, and we want fashion goods and stuff like that. So, and that's exactly is the bulk of our GDP. So do we want this kind of GDP? The point I'm trying to make is very simple. By definition, the higher growth does not mean that it will percolate and trickle down happen. In fact, it has never happened. In the last 30 years, even if there are multi-billionaires in America, lowermost 50 to 60% of the American population's real income, inflation-adjusted real income, has in fact dropped. In India, when GDP grew by 8%, the employment grew by 1%. And if a real trickle-down has to happen, it has to happen only through employment for all. If you want employment for all, you cannot employ very high-end technology or automation which will replace labor. You need to employ technology which will, in fact, people feel comfortable about, people can use, people can learn, and keep on increasing the level of technology as years pass by. Because ultimately the economy or technology is for people and people are not for technology. I think we are putting the horse and cart differently. We are making people run after the technology or certain industries. It's like I'm manufacturing an automobile with very high technology using NC machines and robots. So if you can read those instructions, then you'll get a job. So today, 57% of our people in agriculture in doldrums, I don't need to talk about this. Today, currently the rate of growth in agriculture has reached around 2%, etc. But earlier it was negative. Agriculture is in serious doldrums, apart from droughts and so on. But agricultural population cannot find a job in industries, leave alone services, like airways and hotel receptionists or call centers with American accents and so on. So they're barred from this. So essentially, a bulk of the population cannot find jobs. And there's a tremendous amount of underemployment and unemployment in agriculture as well. So I think the point is not that the growth shouldn't take place, but the growth cannot be inclusive if we follow the pattern of what we produce. If we do not produce for common people goods that they require, we will never reach the level of trickle down and the whole. So the real challenge is not that we should produce more and then distribute. It doesn't work that way. The way we produce itself has elements of whether it can trickle down or not. And I do believe that unless we have full employment, or at least near about full employment, we cannot have a trickle down, we cannot have an inclusive growth. And therefore we need to have a relook at the way we are following a distribution, economic development pattern. There are some examples. For instance, take Roads. The footpaths are almost non-existent in almost all the cities, except a few in Pune, I guess, Bombay. I mean, it's as if the roads are built only for car owners. If a car owner is going, driving in a car, and pedestrians, in fact, people who don't own cars must be 90-95%. I mean, or certainly around 90%. But a pedestrian is walking around, the people in the car look at him, look down upon him, in fact, as if this guy has come from some alien space, and why is he roaming around this street? We don't take care of our elderly. We don't take care of our disabled people. In foreign countries, at least there are different ways the buildings are built, for instance, and we don't have buildings of that nature, except in some few hospitals, etc. The entire design concept, whether it is roads, take parking space, for instance. If you go to Nariman Point, and in Nariman Point, if you take a space that is required for a car to be parked, and I have done this calculation, if Bombay Municipal Corporation sells that space today at the current market rate, which must be higher than Manhattan's rate, if the BMC sells that space and puts that money even in fixed deposit and divide that money by 365 to get the daily rental and divide that by the hours that you normally rent it out for, BMC would get around 100 rupees per hour. And it used to charge 5 rupees, then it increased 10 rupees, and now it must be 30 rupees. But there's a huge subsidization, the tremendous amount of subsidy that the BMC gives to people who park cars. Why is this? The reason is simple. The reason is if you don't do this and charge people 100 rupees per hour as parking charges, then nobody will bring the cars. It will certainly affect the sales of cars. And therefore, what will automobile industry do? I'm sure you know this, that in America, there was a very good public transportation system in not whole of America, but at least California. And because of 3 auto companies, that is Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors, who made representations to the American president, Sloan was, of course, the leading figure from General Motors. And they, in fact, uprooted a public transportation system in San Francisco so that people could buy their cars. I mean, this is a known fact. The automobile industry is so huge and so powerful that even if there's no space to even drive the car, leave alone parking, drive the car on the cities, there are huge delays and there are, the traffic jams. And even then there are hundreds of cars are pouring on the streets because the 20% can or 10% can buy. Unless they buy, the GDP will not grow and the profits will not increase. And unless, so regardless of what happens to cities and pollutions and traffic and payments and whatever, we are driving the economy towards just sort of racing towards GDP growth and only benefit to only a few. And therefore, we're creating these two Indias. And I think this has a lot of bearing on the way we design, what we design. Should we be designing multi-storied or, I don't know anything like multi-storied, but only plush apartment buildings and talking about design of, tiles and some luxury items? Or should we be talking about affordable, cheap, but good housing for millions of people? But we will not, because it's not a profitable business anymore. It doesn't yield profits. Therefore, however much we keep shouting about or we talk about, and a lot has been said and promised, etc., by many governments, very little is done because everything is driven by GDP growth and profits. And therefore, very little is done in the current frame of a current model of economic development. But I think if we really want to go to the level of help to the society, then we need to be talking about how cities should be planned, how payments should be planned, how public transportation should be done. Why, for instance, if we increase the taxes on the automobiles, if we create a very good public transportation system, if we increase the parking charges, thereby reducing the traffic of private vehicles tremendously. Even in London, for instance, there's a charge in the congested area. In Singapore, there's a charge on congested area. If you cross over from one place to another, beyond a certain limit, you pay certain money. Now, we have RFID and there are hundreds of technologies. You can actually use variety of technologies by even charging people if you're driving alone, or maybe 4 people together, or hundreds, you need innovation, and that's where you need to use innovation to reduce the traffic to 1/4 level, increase the public transportation, maybe make it air conditioned, make the frequency much higher, like London, Paris, etc. Almost point to point, you can go for public transportation. So if you do this, there'll be far less pollution, for instance. You can leave spaces for payments, you can leave spaces for cycling, which is non-existent today. And I think, this is a thought. Amsterdam, and there are various places where this is being done on a conscious level. I'm sure we know this. In Europe, on a conscious level, this is being done now. I think we are falling behind. The reason is that we're following a very wrong economic policy, which is creating India and Bharat as two. Take a case of education and healthcare. We should be spending 6% of our GDP on education, 3% on healthcare. Officially, almost every expert has commented on this. Amartya Sen has been shouting about this for ages. When we need to spend 6%, we've been spending far less. So if you want to make up for the shortfall, then we should be spending 7-8% of GDP on education. We spend 2.8%. We actually promised 6% in UPA 1. We spent 2.8%. And maybe because of corruption or whatever, maybe 1.4 must have reached the actual level. So when the actual spending, which has reached the real education, is 1/5 of what it ought to be, how would you have schools and teachers and blackboards and books and computers and laptops and connectivity and education? So there is a huge gap. Take healthcare. Healthcare, we need to spend 3%. We've been spending 1.9 to 1.2%. And in order to make up for the backlog, we need to spend 4-5%. So on every welfare or social schemes, we've been spending 1/5 of what we ought to. And this is where the entire dilemma of for whom the entire economic development is taking place is important. And that has a lot of bearing, because if we keep on building only large flyovers which become necessary because of traffic jams, essentially, because traffic jams happen because we give tremendous amount of boost to the automobile industry, because of their influence and because of increase in GDP that it actually helps build. So it's again the entire economic model that forces us to build the kind of roads, the kind of flyovers, the kind of dams, the kind of malls, the kind of, and so on and so forth. And therefore the industry, the design industry of variety of consumer items, high value consumer items flourishes. Then there are fashion houses and there are, hundreds of things, how to design a tin for Coca-Cola, from whatever. And those obviously have a huge amount of value, and the experts start doing this and they make a lot of money, and they obviously flourish. Like information technology, and I belong to information technology, consider myself personally lucky to be in this industry, to have actually benefited from this, but I've realized that from the overall perspective of the growth of the society, this is not something that we ought to follow. I think we ought to essentially have inclusive growth. We shouldn't follow economic growth which is based on products which are meant only for first 15-20% in a concentrated space. Our industries are very concentrated, by the way, using huge amount of automation, therefore creating unemployment, tremendous amount of pollution, and not employing or not even making people employable, because education is suffering tremendously. Healthcare is, if there is 50% malnutrition amongst children and 50% malnutrition amongst women, how are we creating an equal society? I don't mind. I think I don't believe in communism in which everybody should be paid equally or something like that. That's nonsense. But we should have at least equal opportunity. If somebody has a bicycle and somebody has a Mercedes, I have no problems with it. Somebody lives in a reasonably decent apartment, even one bedroom apartment, and somebody lives in a mansion or bungalow, I have no issues with it. But you cannot have a situation where 50-60% of the people are living extremely miserable, where 50% people are malnourished. The brain development takes place in the first 5 years. If that cannot take place, how can you make a person who studies in a lantern with no electricity, has to go for water for 4-8 kilometers every day for one bucket, and make that person compete with some industrialist son and say, oh, both in a free society, the one has won and the other has lost. I mean, this is completely ridiculous. So I think the first thing we need to do is this. Instead of talking about India as a superpower, the talk that we keep on doing all the time, next 20, 30 years, we need to actually spend a lot of money on education, healthcare, roads. Roads means not flyovers and not 4 and 8 lane highways. If we have extremely good public transportation system, we don't need 4 and 8 way highways at all. Thereby cutting miles and miles, hundreds and thousands of kilometers of jungles, for instance. Thereby creating huge, climate change problems. We are forced to do this because of automobiles, and the whole thing is connected. So the point is, when I say roads, I mean roads to the villages. When I mean electricity, I mean electricity to the villages, and so on. So if we can spend huge amount of money on these projects in the next 20 to 30 years, and that's where our design should be actually, this is how I see it. Beyond this, I really don't know too much about design, so I'm probably a layman, but I believe that our design, whether it is cities or suburbs or houses or roads or automobiles, all that can be actually, can sort of circle around or can be based on the development model that we choose. And I think that's why I thought I'll put forward or speak in front of you about how two Indias are created. I just want to sort of finish it with one thought. We are told time and again that we are an IT superpower, and that I think complete rubbish. We are 3% of the people who have computers, 3 to 4%. 8 to 10% use internet. 18 to 20% you can read newspapers. Let's not talk about what impact it has on democracy. If 18-20% can read newspapers. But the point is, and 30% are illiterate of official data. IIM Ahmedabad conducted a study. When government said 30% illiterate, they actually went to various houses, thousands of houses actually, when they did the study. You know how government conducts a study? Government goes to a house and asks them, how many people literate? Total number 6. How many literate? 6. And how many illiterate? 2. Then they go to the next house and they accumulate and collate the data and present it to you. So IIM Ahmedabad just wanted to verify whether they, what people are actually saying is right or not. They went to a house and they said, how many illiterate? 4. Then they said, okay, show me how you write, Actually asked them to read a few sentences, and they found out that the actual real illiteracy rate was 1.5 times the rate that government was talking about. So in a country where 3% or 4% have computers, 8 to 10% of internet, and 18 to 20% read newspapers, less than 1 crore people work in IT or IT related, and only 30 lakhs, that is 3 million out of 120 crores work in information technology. When we don't have a basic information technology used for common people, a few lakh people working in the night for coding, testing, and maintenance projects from some vague American company, I won't call this an IT superpower, for God's sake. I mean, I can just sort of give you a model that I have in mind about healthcare, what I would then start calling as IT superpower, or not IT superpower, some IT achievement, I must say. Taken for example, there is primary health centers which exist, by the way, but are not very well equipped, or at least as well equipped as they should be. Imagine that there are these PHCs in clusters of villages. In each cluster of villages, there is one PHC, primary health center. And in each primary health center, there is some basic equipment such as ECG and X-ray machine and so on and so forth, and some basic path lab. And then there is a nurse, and there are one or two, at least some beds. And is there an indication to me? Okay. But I'm going to finish in 2 minutes. So basically, then there is a doctor who need not be MBBS. We all keep hearing about the doctors are not ready to go to the villages and so on. That person could be BSc biology and can be trained for 2 years on human anatomy, physiology, and basic medicine. Now this person can cure 95% of our basic illnesses, cold and fever and body ache and cholera, malaria, and loose motions, to whatever. I mean, hundreds of things that people actually come to doctors for. Most of the common illnesses, I must say. For only 5% of the cases, that PHC is connected, all PHCs are connected, and they are connected to district level and district to metropolitan levels. And each level, district level, there are MBBSs and so on, and metropolitan, there are MDs or DMs or whatever. And this hierarchy exists. Only for those 5% of the cases, the nurse actually puts a stethoscope to the patient, and the heartbeats can be heard by a doctor who is MD. That doesn't require great technology. I mean, it exists. The ECG is taken at PHC level, which is digital today, can be sent directly to the doctor who is in the city. X-ray is digital today, that is taken and sent to the doctor. Nurse says, show me your tongue, and actually that can be seen by video conferencing by a doctor there. Instead, we sit at night to talk to our children in America at night as to which mall did you buy what, etc. every night, That's how we use video conferencing. Instead, if we use video conferencing in this fashion, the doctor in the metropolitan city can then say, okay, why don't you change your medicines from this to this? And next week again I'll examine you. And he examines next week, and then he or she says, okay, now I think you need to come to the cities. And then that person travels to the cities. Now I think you need equipment in the first place. You need connectivity in the second place. You need a national plan in the third place. And I think if we do this, and if we use information technology in this fashion, I would start calling information technology at least not a superpower, but at least IT is being used in a proper fashion. This is just one example. You can talk about education for common people in terms of agriculture, what to sow, where are the markets, and so on and so forth. To basic education to various people, you can use tele-education using computers, etc. There are hundreds of things that we could use IT for. Instead, a few lakh people work for IT, testing and maintenance. They make enough money because of market situation. They think they're very bright, far brighter than mechanical engineers or civil engineers because they are in IT. Then they go to America and then start criticizing India as a backward country and so on. I think this model of economic development, which is only catering to the first 15-20%, creating market of their own, they have demand for these consumer luxury goods, and therefore only those are produced. They add to GDP, and we call ourselves as GDP growth 8-9%, and then we call us as a country which is progressing. It's, I think, completely a wrong thing to do. It doesn't mean that trickle down is not happening, but it's not happening at the rate at which it should. And I think that's where my challenge begins. I would probably end my talk now. I just that all this has a lot of bearing on what we design, what we produce, and therefore what we design, and how we should be looking at the design process completely. But I can't really elaborate much more because I'm not an expert in this. But thank you for a patient hearing. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Godbole. If there are any questions, we'd like to take that.
I am Dr. Sarabjit Singh. I am from FPJ Satya University from Gurgaon. I also happen to be from IIT Kanpur. First, congratulations, sir. You are upfront, bold, and to the dot. This problem is this. 80-20 formula follows. 80% of budget is for 20%, and 20% budget is for 80%. Difficulty is with the technocrat as well, and the politician and the planners. Our mind is not for designing. If I'm a technocrat and I'm a designer, I'm designing for a product to sell abroad, make more money, more and more money. The owner of the company wants that, I'm his designer.
I can't hear it properly.
If I'm a designer...
No, I think there's something wrong with acoustics.
Okay, I'll keep it away. No. If I'm a designer, I'm designing to maximize profitability for the owner of the company. I want to export, earn more dollar. If I'm a professor teaching in the university where I am, I'm taking case studies of US, France, America, maybe Australian. I'm quoting figures in dollars, millions, all the time figures. It never occurs to me, I'm talking about the area which is 80% of India. If I'm a town planner at a state level in Haryana, sitting in Chandigarh, I'm planning a road expansion. I'm all the time thinking, expanding the road, minimizing congestion, traffic flow, red light, flyovers. So you were very right. Until it comes in the minds and the hearts of the top politicians, top town planners and designers, that we are designing something for sustainability. Whose sustainability?
Right, absolutely.
It will also help to stop or slow down the flow from rural to urban
Absolutely.
flood
Absolutely.
which is coming.
Absolutely.
So when we are designing, for designing's sake, we want to look and feel to be good. We want minimum material, minimum cost, quick time, quick export. So there's a dichotomy.
Yeah, can I?
Yeah.
Okay. I think you said it absolutely right. The only thing is, I mean, I'm not trying to say that profit motive should not be there. I'm not trying to say like a typical communist would say. All I'm saying is, within the system itself, you can create the encouragement, financial and otherwise, to people who are doing this, or government itself. I'll give you an example. Supposing a private enterprise starts building roads into the villages, or electricity supplying to the villages, or educating masses, for instance, or the way I described to you, the healthcare system, or education system, hundreds of other things. Drinking water, it's a shame that we have to actually buy water at 15 rupees a bottle, which can be afforded only by 1%, 5% of the people. Why can't I assume all municipalities supply us water which we can drink? The water bottle industry will collapse. So there's a huge interest of these industries in municipalities not supplying us very drinkable water. But that's another aspect. All I'm trying to say is, if any even private industry takes these social projects, government can subsidize these industries. So there is an encouragement that we can discuss. This is not a good forum, but what should we do about deficit and so on and so forth. And I have a good amount of argument for this, but this is not the right forum. All I'm trying to say is that if private profits are protected by government aiding these projects which are socially motivated, that's one way of doing it. Instead, we are letting them free. You do what you want. Even there are hundreds of cars pouring in every day in only limited cities, just completely destroying the ambience, environment, living conditions. There's nobody to stop it. Who is going to stop it, you tell me? Next 10 years, do you know what Pune and Hyderabad and Bombay are going to look like? Next 10, 20 years? I shudder to think. It's impossible. So basically, unless we discourage this kind of development, unless we encourage social projects by government spending money in education, healthcare, I'm not trying to say that the government itself needs to spend. Government can or needs to take up these projects. We can always talk about corruption and delays in government. Government can maybe give the projects to the private contractors. Like Keynes, for instance, never believed that government itself should do the projects. Even if a private company is doing it, government should aid that project. Keynes' argument, we don't need to go into the economics, but basically the argument was essentially that the work should be done for welfare. Now, if you, for instance, you're driven by profits, all right, but when you start doing that, when profits are good, even for social projects, because of the government help, you will automatically start doing it. So I agree with you. It's also a question of conscience, and people should realize that there is a lot of social value in doing projects which are good for society, building affordable and climate-friendly houses, one of roads, and etc. But I think it's also important for the government to change policies of economic development rather than letting it free for only the first 10-15% to enjoy and live the way they live. Instead, directing it in the fashion that is beneficial to all. That's all I'm trying to say. But that's a good question.
Ladies and gentlemen, a kind request. Please ask questions, make it as brief, do not give your opinions. Thank you so much. Okay, sir, I have a question for you by somebody. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yeah.
Okay, what are the major roadblocks in technology adoption in India?
For one, I think there is very little innovation in our country. In fact, I am very glad Ms. Kirloskar is here, was actually supporting a great amount of innovation. I came to know only, very short while ago. We need a lot more of this. We need, I really find very little path-breaking innovation in India. I mean, I'm very sorry to say, and I don't know whether you agree with me or not, but there's a lot of copycat things that are going on. I mean, I'm sad to say that right from tiles to any electronics or anything that we do, literally, there's a lot that we just borrow from West. And Even in computers, for instance, we just sort of assemble something that happened in Taiwan or Singapore or whatever, electronics for that matter. Even if the chappa may be Indian, but lot is copied. Even in automobiles, the import content is very high, even if the cars are Indian, by the way. There's very little, I must say, that, and even if economic growth is very high, I have a lot of data, by the way, to show, comparison between India, China and US, the kind of patents that we file in technology area, or the kind of research papers that we produce in very, respected journals, is abysmally low. Abysmally, and in fact, in the last 30 years has fallen. Unfortunately, I don't have the data right now, but I can produce some if you are interested. So basically, the issue that I'm trying to, just to tell you, for 90 years, we don't have a Nobel laureate. We go and build IBM's operating system. We go and build Intel chips. We don't have a Nobel laureate after C.V. Raman. We have a Nobel laureate in Amartya Sen who lives in America. Somebody told me in CERN experiment in physics, you need a lot of, particle accelerators which are very expensive, which we can't afford, though TIFR is one, but not as big as what CERN had, and I understand that. But why do we need money for economics, for that matter? Why do we need money for mathematics? I think after colonialism, we need to go into the history, which again we don't have time into, but we have not got used to copying and adopting and making quick buck, whether it is automobile design, whether anything else. So I'm sorry to say this is a great designer sitting here, I understand. But I'm making a general comment here, as I can understand. Whether it's branded goods, the fiber, that is the cloth is Indian, the tailors are Indian, but you make a chappa of some brand and then you sell it for 10 times or 5 times. So, the point is that whether it is, take any product, including underwears, I must say, I'm sorry to say this, but all fashion goods, cosmetics, there's a huge amount of either directly selling the products or copying the products. And I think there's a quick money there, and therefore that's in fact one of the main obstacles in innovation. Secondly, there's a lot of barrier to entry. I for one don't believe in Thomas Friedman's theory of world is flat at all. Thomas Friedman, when he wrote World is Flat, he had assumed that now competition, because of internet, he assumed that anybody can compete even from his attic, from a very small room in his house. I can compete with the best in New York or anywhere else. And I think that's all complete rubbish. I've worked in IT industry for 32 years. When I had thousands of people working under me, when I used to go and make a presentation in America, they used to say, you have only so many thousands, but TCS has so many thousands of people. They have actually worked in 10 times your projects. So the size matters, the turnover matters, the monopolies or the big companies always will be preferred. So the competition is never equal. Excepting only in a few rare cases which are always shown up as examples that almost anybody can do this, but that's wrong. There's a huge barrier to entry in terms of how to reach markets, how to do marketing, including the money that you need to sort of put together to even do the research and so on. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done in technological help, but I'm glad that few companies are doing it, but we need lot more, I think.
So we have time for, okay, Mr. Vyas would like to ask. We have time just for one question.
I think this scenario which you have brought in, Bharat versus India, but I also see that there may be a great opportunity in this country.
Yes.
To look forward to
yes.
in an optimistic way.
Yes.
So would you like to say something on that, what opportunity we are sitting on and we should really look into?
From design perspective, I don't know the opportunity, but I think I must say, as I have said, for instance, I don't want to sort of repeat one example, but or just want to be speaking nice about somebody I came to know only a few minutes back. But there was one example of Pune itself, of how there were roads that were bad and how they could be improved by a small innovation, which was not necessarily only technological, but technology and business together by, again, I think, Ms. Kirloskar. But I think the point I'm trying to make, we need social engineering. We don't need only sort of high-tech is good, but high-tech only to serve the luxurious consumption of only a minor few. But if we turn that into something that can be used for majority, We have a lot that can be done in technology, in design, in education. We need lots of teachers, we need lots of designers, not lots of architects to build affordable houses. We need a lot of things as to how to produce the same thing using less power, and things like that. So I think the R&D should be actually, solar energy to wind energy to hundreds of things. I mean, there are many, even road construction, I'm told there are a lot of material in road construction which are cheaper, which are more durable and so on and so forth. So I think as we go along, the research elements or work areas in which we could work will increase. And those are huge amount of opportunities for people, workers, designers, engineers and so on and so forth, I guess. But I can't sort of, say anything. But if we do this, the entire scenario is very hopeful. I mean, I'm not trying to say that we are doomed society. I mean, it's just that we need to change our perspective. That's what I feel.
Okay, Chota sa. Here's a Chota sa question.
Yes, Mr. Godbole,
Yeah.
what is it like if you go into politics and take that decisions, what do you think of to make it realize? Because all what you have talked is all well-known things. We know all these deficiencies. We also know there's a sky's limit for opportunities for designer. But who is going to take that, who is going to give that opportunities? Those are the politicians. Those are the decision makers. So who is going to make them sensitive to take all these design decisions or make your environment in order? So how do you see this thing?
No,
so I think people should be there, people like you should be there into politics, yeah? Rather than...
Thank you very much, but I don't think I have intentions of entering into politics. All I'm saying is, I do not believe for one, just to sort of, make a small correction if you will, I do not for one believe that it's only a few, it's a political issue only. I mean, it's I think a systemic issue in terms of socio-economic structure. The way we have adopted the development model. If the development model is same, and even if I sit there as the Prime Minister or anybody else sits as the Prime Minister, nothing will happen. I think it's a question of we changing the model, and the change of model is not only by one or two politicians, because there's a lot of influence of the business community on how we choose the development model. So we all need to actually, first of all, democratically elect only such government which professes and actually abides by and actually practices a model or economic development philosophy which will reach to all. And today, it's only lip service that most of the parties pay, and we all know that. So I think it's ultimately a choice that we all need to make. But you can rest assured, and he was, I have relief that I'm not entering politics. Thank you.